Hi, it's Kim Boon. Today we're going to talk about the Singapore Press Holdings. So most of you know, SPH used to be in all sorts of businesses like real estate, exhibitions, and convenience retail. In 2021, all of that changed when the non-media businesses were sold off, and the remaining media business was re-established as the SPH Media Trust. So why am I telling you this grandmother story, you may ask? Because in 2022, the Singapore government announced that up to $180 million a year is allocated to SPH over the next 5 years. So almost $1 billion of taxpayers' money will be supporting public service media. So now, fast forward to 2025, leader of the opposition, Pritam Singh, sought clarification about SPH during the Committee of Supply debates on the 7th of March.
It did not meet all its KPIs on digital reach, youth reach, vernacular reach, and average time spent on its websites and apps. Accordingly, it did not get the full funding, it did not receive the full funding that was committed. For FY 2024-2025, what objective criteria did the ministry set for these KPIs that were not reached? More specifically, were these KPIs lowered or were they increased? Has SPH Media Trust fared any better since last year?
The key takeaway here is KPIs. Key performance indicators are essentially targets. So targets are set for SPH. Some targets were not met. So naturally, it makes sense to ask about whether those targets were adjusted and how well SPH are tracking to those targets today. So nothing out of line here. So these are all fair questions. So let's walk through some of Minister Josephine Teo's clarifications.
Like news outlets worldwide, SPH Media's print subscriptions have declined as readers shift to consuming news online. I can share that SPH Media's digital subscriptions have held steady, and it is now 35% higher than print subscriptions. It was only 20% higher 2 years ago.
So Minister Teo talked about digital subscriptions. So let's look at the performance. Digital subs stayed the same. I'm surprised because it didn't grow. But that's also probably due to people these days expecting digital content for free. So I thought it was strange to highlight that digital subs relative to print 2 years ago had gone up. I mean, if you look at it, right, digital subs stagnated while print declined. If I was CEO of a public company, I would not have highlighted this. It just looks really bad.
When funding was discussed in support of SPH Media Trust, at the time, reach was one of the important KPIs. Over time, we also considered that engagement is important, is actually one of them. But in addition to that, we now think that trust as well as public satisfaction are just as important. So we will look to including them as part of the KPIs that we track.
Okay, very clear. So Minister Teo actually ended all of this by saying that it would be impossible to list all the KPIs.
But just to say that like all ministries, it is not possible to list all of the KPIs. And so I seek members' understanding for that.
Honestly, that left me wanting a little bit more than what I understand so far. But you know what? Let's move on from KPIs.
SPH Media will have to continue its pivot to digital news, and the government must support this effort so that our PSM entities can meet audiences where they are.
I think this makes a lot of sense. So if Singaporeans are increasingly digital, you want to pivot your media outlets towards digital. So for myself, when I do research for videos like this, I usually look to CNA rather than Straits Times because the former is more digital native. In fact, this echoes what Pritam Singh shared.
I would like to share anecdotal feedback from those who follow local English news closely, for example, that Channel News Asia's reporting and commentary on local issues in terms of depth has overtaken that of the Straits Times.
Now, I want to make a quick tangent and talk about this in relation to how taxpayers' money are deployed.
Does the ministry conduct local surveys to gauge the public response to our local media outlets? And if so, how does it make the decision to deploy taxpayer dollars to those media outlets that rank less satisfactorily in the public eye?
I thought that this was a very good question. So let's use an analogy that every parent is familiar with. So if you give your kid $5 for school recess time, you would expect that he or she spends it on nourishing food for his or her mind and soul. And if they are spending most of it on tidbits, then that's not a good way to spend that money. And since you are the one giving that money, you probably want to know exactly how much of that is going to fishball noodles versus how much of it is going to gummy bears, chocolate bars, and twisties. So let's look at how Minister Teo responded.
And it is perhaps my, again, humble suggestion to members to look at the performance of public service media holistically, because in truth, we need all of them to reach as many Singaporeans as we can.
Okay, let's talk about where I agree. Holistic view, I agree. Needing both CNA and Straits Times to reach out to Singaporeans, I also agree. But the question is whether resources are deployed fit for purpose. Okay, I think that it would have been helpful if there was some clarity on synergies between print and digital in reaching Singaporeans. Because in my mind, currently, these are completely different customers, so to speak. So if digital is where the customers are going, I would think that there will be more marketing dollars, or in this case, more taxpayers' money going towards CNA rather than Straits Times. So that's my thoughts on taxpayers' money. I also want to share some thoughts about some of the intangible benefits of SPH. Some things in life are tangible, some not so much. So for example, you may remember the hoo-ha earlier last year. The Singapore Tourism Board confirmed that a grant was provided to help bring Taylor Swift her world tour to Singapore. So I have no idea what the dollar amount was, but Thailand Prime Minister at the time claimed that it was about 2 to 3 million USD per show. So let's look at it hypothetically, right? So that would be 12 to 18 million dollars since there was 6 shows total. So at that time, economists that were cited by CNA said that there was projected around 500 million Singapore dollars in tourism receipts that would benefit Singapore's economy. So obviously in this case, we would be able to measure dollars and cents. But let's not also forget about the intangibles. So having Taylor Swift do a show in Singapore as her only Southeast Asia stop makes Singapore look good as a country. And I'm not saying that that was the goal, but it definitely achieved that intangible effect.
Most of the assets of the SPH Media Trust are print. Still, even though they have digital versions, and they are meant to be national papers of record.
SPH. It provides some intangibles. Actually, I should say tangible but hard to measure benefits to Singapore. First, Minister Teo had mentioned that print media like the Straits Times are national papers of record. I agree, because the legacy and heritage needs to be recorded somewhere, and that role is being fulfilled that way. Also, a national media can also serve as an effective communicator of key government messages to its people. And I know, one can argue about how certain media outlets can be the government's echo chamber, but I'm not going to get into all of that. But what I'm going to talk about is that the alternative is probably worse. So let's use an analogy. Have you played Chinese Whispers? So you get 10 people to stand in a line, you pass a message to the first person, who then whispers it into the ears of the second person, and then the second person whispers it to the third, and so on and so forth until it reaches the last person. And then the last person shouts out what they heard. And you'll find that often the message is completely different. So to end this video, I'll say a couple of things. I agree with the minister that KPIs are not the only thing that matters. There must be consideration given to things like SPH serving as a communication vehicle to Singaporeans and as a record-keeping mechanism. However, even if KPIs are not the be-all and all, we still have to understand what they are holistically, not just a selective few. After all, what cannot be measured cannot be managed, as the famous saying goes. So that's all we have for today. I'm really looking forward to hearing what all of you have to say. Leave us your thoughts in the comments section below. And until next time, this is the Red Dot Perspective.